Coming up on Chasing the Natty, we are concluding our series analyzing the 2025 transfer portal season, and today we'll be finishing up by tackling both the tight end positions and all of those players coming up from the FCS ranks and entering our player pool this year. Are transfer tight ends even worth pursuing? Who among the FCS players can translate to the FBS level and produce year one? We'll find out as we touch on 30 plus players today. We've got all of that and more coming right after this.
Look at Jinty go, breaks a tackle, he's 10, he's touchdown! Cook's gonna throw the deep ball, and Burton past the defense! Touchdown, Luther Burton! Milrow gonna run it again, got a lane, kicked in the turbo, Milrow! Goodbye! Touchdown, Bama!
This is Chasing the Natty, a college fantasy football podcast. All right, welcome in everyone. This is Jared Palmgren, host of the Chasing the Natty podcast. I hope you guys are having a wonderful ride to your work on this Monday morning. We are the College Fantasy Football Podcast on the Campus to Canton Podcast Network. You can find us on all of your podcast feeds and on YouTube every Monday morning during the season at 6 a.m. sharp. If you want to support the great work we do here, head on over to campus2canton.com. Subscribe there to any of our phenomenal tiers. We got content ranging on all sorts of your college football games, whether that's college fantasy, Devy, Campus Canton leagues, college IDP, college DFS. Really, if you play it, then we've got content, whether that's tools, rankings, pretty much everything you need to succeed. In fact, now, if you want to support the show even further, you can make sure you go and when you sign up for one of our yearly membership tiers, you use the promo code NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y, to get 10% off of your yearly membership. Again, that promo code is NATTY, N-A-T-T-Y. If you can't do that, you can show us some love by leaving a like, a comment, subscribe if you're watching this on the YouTube side of things. If you're on the podcast side of things, leave a 5-star review. Make sure you're following the show. Not only does that show us support, but it shows the entire game of college fantasy football in general a ton of support. If you have any further questions or just want to get in touch for whatever reason, you can find me in the show on Twitter. I'm at CFF_Jared. The show is at Chasing the Natty, and the handsome fellow joining me for the third time, I would say this month, but we're already in February now, but still, third time in 4 weeks, it is Mr. Chris Moxley. Mox, you're probably going to submit your quota for show appearances after this point. You're going to tell me no more appearances the rest of the year. You have filled your quota, good sir.
Yeah, it's like using your deductible early in a year, right? And then
exactly.
You can do whatever you can do whatever you want at that point. But yeah, I happy to be back. I know we're talking tight ends today, so right in my wheelhouse, bread and butter.
Not only tight ends, but also FCS guys. You are one of the few degenerates that I know that is willing to follow that along pretty much as the season's going on. You probably know about most of these guys that we're going to talk about here today before half of them even enter the portal. And you were probably the most excited when you saw them enter the portal and figured out where they're going. So, again, lot to talk about today. Again, we're kind of smushing both of these in here today. Mostly because, again, tight ends, they don't really warrant their own show, at least not the transfer ones. And we'll get to it today. I'm not super excited about a lot of these guys. I think all of them really have questions, but I guess that's where we'll kind of start here today is the value of a transfer tight end, right? Even compared to a lot of other positions, transfer tight ends have been very hit or miss over the years, right? So if we want to go back just even the last 2 years, like there's really only 5 guys in the last 2 years I can really point to as year one transfer tight ends that have had great finishes, right? Eli Stowers this year at Vanderbilt, and he followed his OC and quarterback there. Pat Conroy out of Old Dominion just kind of came out of nowhere. And then Justin Jolie, a guy that a lot of people liked, he was tight end 17 on the year. And then obviously you go back to 2023, Dallin Holker, tight end 1 on the year. I think that was a very unique situation. Great system, great talent. I'm so sad that he did not come back for 2024, considering the fact he went undrafted. And then like Rivaldo Fairweather, but as you can see, that's 5 guys in 2 years here, right? You also see that a lot of guys who were big-time tight ends at smaller schools transferring up, whether it's from G5 to P4 or, transferring, from lower P4 to upper P4. A lot of them just haven't really worked out too well. Like Jack Velling, even following his coach and his quarterback, going from tight end 10 to tight end 45 this year. Drake Dabney going from tight end 12 in 2023 down to tight end 203 this year. Justin Jolie, he remained about the same, so good on him. He was tight end 13 in 2023, tight end 17 in 2024. And then even the year before that, back in 2022, Caden Prescore, Seydou Traore, Jaheim Bell, all of these guys took hits in their value after they transferred. So, Mox, I guess before we kind of get into the very specific guys, how are you kind of feeling about this tight end class when it comes to the transfers? Do you think that they'll start to kind of break this trend a little bit more? What do you think?
Yeah, I actually really do like this class. I think there's probably 3 or 4 tight ends that I think are legit good tight ends, regardless of where you plop them down in what system. I think part of the issue that we have with tight end transfers specifically is not every offense utilizes the tight end the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Some offenses feature them and some don't. So, but every offense coordinator wants a tight end, right? Like they want a big body, someone who can stretch the field, and a good tight end might be going from a 60 to 70 target situation to one that's like 30 to 40 targets. And it's not always an indictment of the player. It might just be an indictment of the system. And so you really have to marry the two together and determine where that success story really can be told and really can come from. Because like players are transferring up for money, right? Like that at the end of the day, money, opportunity, like NFL eyes. You're not getting the same eyes as you are in the lower conference, but you're also probably a much better player.
Mm-hmm.
So running back, wide receiver is a little bit different because every offense utilizes them. Not every offense utilizes a tight end. So I think we have a couple though this year.
There's definitely a couple here, and that's something I also want to bring up here. Obviously, the Way Too Early draft special will come out next week, so everybody out there be on the lookout for that. And one of the things that stood out to me was really just how much of a crapshoot tight end it is this year compared to even previous years. Like, we always find like 1 or 2 guys that we're kind of willing to push up draft boards a little bit. I mean, shoot, a couple years ago when we had, the likes of Brock Bowers, Michael Mayer, guys like that, obviously you're willing to take them super high. But last year, even like we were kind of pushing them down to like the 6th round. That was where you're getting your Harold Fannons, guys like that. This year, I wouldn't be surprised once we get into like 30 round drafts that we're not seeing tight ends come off until like the 10th round. Because again, it's just nobody's coming back from last year. Like, let me see. Yeah, of the top 12 players, not a single one returns to their team. Like, you have 8 of the top 12 going off to the draft, and then Koziel, Claire, Carter, Fleming, all 4 of those guys transferred, and they're at different situations this year. So, as Mox kind of mentioned, we'll kind of evaluate whether or not those are good positions that they end up in. But I'll ask you, Mox, with so little known coming back at tight end there at the top, is this the year to kind of take shots on guys landing in good situations with some of these transfer tight ends? Or do you kind of play it a bit more safe? Grab a guy like Eli Stowers, Matthew Lauder, Justin Jolie, Joe Royer, Blake Bosma, guys that kind of finished in that second tier of tight ends last year, but really it doesn't seem like are going to get you that ceiling you might be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, safety is not bad at this position, especially because, getting 10 fantasy points a game from your tight end spot might be a difference-making tight end compared to what your league mates have. So there's like Joe Royer's guy I'm probably going to draft quite a bit of. If he goes early, like early, probably not. But I just don't think he's like a ceiling play. I don't know that he has tight end 1, like the tight end 1 potential. I do think he's going to be a tight end 1. So right there's a mix of safety, proven production versus shooting for upside. And I think now that we've seen a couple of those guys in the same system turning over, like, yeah, you could target some of them.
Would it shock you, Mox, if I told you that the first 2 tight ends that came off the board in the Way Too Early mock were both transfer tight ends?
No, because I know what the transfer class looks like, and I genuinely think that they probably are the top 2 tight ends.
So, with that being said, I think we can go ahead and get into the actual transfer guys that we're going to talk about here, Mox. So let's swing on over to this page right here. And let me find the right button. There we go. All right. For those of you watching on the graphics and everything, we're going to throw 5 guys up on the screen here, and then we'll kind of go through them one at a time. Kind of a hybrid of what we've been doing the last couple of weeks, where normally we would go like one at a time. They're the only guy we're focusing on. And then at the end, we would kind of, run through them real quick. I'm going to run through the first 5 guys here, and then we'll take just a little bit of time with each individual one as we go through. So the 5 tight ends I have on the board here, for those of you listening on podcasts, I got Max Clare going from Purdue to Ohio State. We got Tanner Kozio going from Ball State to Wisconsin. We got Luke Haas going from Arkansas to Ole Miss. We got Arliss Boardingham going from Florida to Bowling Green. And then we got Terrence Carter going from Louisiana to Texas Tech. So, Mox, let's start with the first guy here, Max Clare. Formerly tight end 8 last year. He's going to Ohio State, which gave us Cade Stover in 2023. His Stover's stat line 2023, 41 catches, 576 yards, 5 touchdowns. A very good tight end stat line. You will take that every year from your tight end in college fantasy. I believe he finished tight end 13 overall that year. So my thought process on this, Mox, is obviously we didn't get a ton out of the tight end position last year with Ohio State. We kind of saw a lot of split work between G. Scott and, oh my gosh, what's the other guy's name? I can't remember off the top of my head. G. Scott and the Ohio transfer, Will K.
Will Kekmarek or however you pronounce it.
So we saw them kind of split things up a little bit there. Obviously, Will K was injured at different points during the season, so I don't think they really got to use the tight end exactly how they wanted to last year. But we know Ryan Day and his system is willing to use tight ends. We know Chip Kelly is willing to use tight ends. If you go back and look at his history during his time at UCLA there, the thing that really stands out to me is that Ohio State, I think, if you're looking at their offense next year, they need a threat over the middle, right? Currently, the guy set to inherit the slot is Brandon Inniss. Brandon Inniss, obviously a former 5-star wide receiver. No doubt in my mind that he can handle himself well there, but I think everybody kind of agrees that he's not quite Emeka Egbuka. He's not Jackson Smith and Jigba. They're going to need some help with some guys over the middle there. I think they're going to try to use the tight end a little bit more. I think that's why they went and grabbed a guy like Max Clare, who was tearing up the Big 12 or Big 10 last year, even on a terrible Purdue team. So I personally think this is one transfer tight end that I'm okay with going and grabbing in drafts. Mox, what do you think?
Yeah, I love Clare. I loved him last year too. He was pretty reasonable in drafts, and you're getting him kind of late. And it's not like he had a monster season at Purdue, but he was a pretty dang good player for the Boilermakers on an offense that really couldn't throw the ball all that much. Like, Card got injured or benched, I guess a little bit of both. And you had Ryan Brown take over. And outside of that, the second half of the Illinois game, Ryan Brown can't throw the football. So it was possibly the worst situation he could be in. And now he's moving up. And, it's interesting when these big schools target certain players like Clare. I assume they paid him pretty well to come. Like, I bet he was a really hot name because he is young. Mm-hmm. This is his 4th season. I guess 2022 was like a true redshirt. He didn't play at all. I don't know. I really like the player. I just think he's good. And you're right about Ohio State. I think wants to use the tight end if they can. Like, G. Scott isn't really a tight end. Like, he's a converted wide receiver. But you saw in the playoffs, they got him the ball quite a bit. Like, he was featured part of that game plan. So I wonder if that's something they're going to look forward to in 2025 that they kind of didn't do a whole lot of last year. And I think Clare's good. I think he's athletic. Like, he's not the biggest tight end. He's like 240, but still.
I think it also helped that they'll have a young quarterback next year, most likely Julian Sayin, as we're kind of predicting now, right? Young quarterbacks, a lot of times they will utilize that tight end, right? Big target, right? You don't have to be as on target as you normally would be with like a wide receiver, right? I think a lot of things are kind of coming together here. I understand why Max Clare could easily fit into somebody's top 10 at tight ends, if not top 5. What about Tanner Kozio here, Max? Kozio finished as a tight end 4 last year. I mean, his true freshman year was also a top 12 season at tight end. Then he kind of had a mid-season in between, tried to transfer out, came back to Ball State. Ball State rewarded him coming back with, again, an awesome season here. Then Kozio rewarded them by transferring out again, and this time he actually finds a destination here with the Wisconsin Badgers. Wisconsin's kind of interesting, right? Because like we know Luke Fickell can utilize a tight end, right? Like go back and look at his time at Cincinnati when they had Josh Wiley. He was pretty consistent CFF option for tight ends every year because of how he was used, especially in the red zone. So we've been looking at Wisconsin the last couple of years. I've drafted plenty of Tucker Ashcrafts and, draft picks like that, hoping that they would kind of get that Wiley role. Hasn't happened. Wisconsin goes out of their way to grab Koziel here. What do we think, Mox? Is this a tanking Koziel's value here, or do you think there's something here that Koziel could be utilized in the Big Ten?
So, I mean, we're kind of in the weeds. We watch a lot of MAC football and everything. Koziel never really stuck out to me as a player that was dominant in terms of athleticism. Like, I don't think he's a better athlete than anybody else in Wisconsin or the Big Ten. So that concerns me a little bit. Like, I'm not sure he's a draftable player in the NFL, is basically what I'm saying. So if he's not a difference maker athletically, then he has to be a really good technician, or Wisconsin has to feed him. And I think that that's probably going to happen, considering they went out and targeted him and he was highly productive and he can get open. It's not that he's not a good football player. I just don't think the athleticism is there. And that really concerns me with the tight end spot. Mm-hmm. So I'm throwing a little bit of cold water on it, but I think he's just a good college player. And if he's a good college player and the offense doesn't really have, they lost Will Pauling, so there needs someone to kind of step into that type of role. Mm-hmm. I think Koziel could do it. And he's big too. He's at least 6'7". He may be taller than that. I think he's a really good option. And I think the offense could certainly feature him, because we kind of saw that a little bit with Billy Edwards at Maryland last year. He likes to use the tight end. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if he is another top 5 finish.
This strikes me as a play that you could possibly go for if you're kind of trying to aim for a safer play. Because, like you touched on there, Mox, Will Pauling's gone. Bryson Green's gone. CJ Williams is gone. I think Treka Kahuna, I can't remember if he withdrew from the portal or not. He might be gone as well. That leaves him Vinny Anthony, who kind of stepped up towards the end of the season, and that's really it. They don't really have a lot of receiving options there. I can't remember exactly who else they brought in through the portal, if they have brought in anybody. So I think just by default, if you go out and grab a guy like Koziel, who probably similar to Claire, probably a guy that was pretty sought after, I think he comes in with some promises made about him being featured in the offense, and I think he'll be a safer play. What about Luke Haas? Oh, good.
One thing at Koziel, maybe not giving him maybe I'm not giving him enough credit, because his ADOT was 7, and he did a little bit of yak work. I don't know. I don't betting on an athletic tight end, and I'm not sure how athletic he is. We'll see.
I'm doing a quick look at Wisconsin real quick, just to make sure I didn't miss any obvious guys they're bringing. Oh, they're bringing Mark Hamper from Idaho. Jaden Ballard. Yeah. Jaden Ballard from Ohio State. That Ballard might be interesting.
I bet Ballard plays a lot of special teams for them.
Oh, I almost guarantee you.
Yeah, I bet that's why they brought him in. So Koziel has a 21 percentile speed score in our database at Campus Can.
21 percentile?
Yeah, I just don't know how I think he's really that power. We don't have any other numbers on him is the problem, because he's a Ball State player. So yeah. I don't know. It's just something in the back of my mind that I'm thinking about before I'm rushing out to take him as a top 3 tight end.
No, I definitely agree. I think it is a good rule of thumb that, going spending up heavily for a unathletic tight end just doesn't make a lot of sense. One guy that we do know is pretty athletic is Luke Haas, the former tight end out of Arkansas. He is transferring over to Ole Miss. Mox, I've burned myself once already on a talented tight end going to Ole Miss. Why not get excited about another one here? Haas had himself a fantastic freshman season in 2023. 5 games, he had 17 targets, 16 receptions, 253 yards, 3 touchdowns. You extrapolate that to 12 games, so you're talking about, 38 receptions, 600 yards, 7 touchdowns. That would have been good for tight end 7 last year. So obviously, he's got the goods. He can perform in the SEC. Obviously, he got hurt that year, so comes back this year. this year, not as great, right? Finishing 31 targets total in his full 12 games. I didn't even check what he ranked in tight ends. He just wasn't a tight end for CFF last year, right? He transfers out. He's going to Ole Miss. We have seen Lane Kiffin and this staff utilize the tight end before with the likes of, Kenny Yeboah, Harrison Bryant back during his time at Florida Atlantic. Can we trust Haas to potentially rekindle that tight end love for Ole Miss, Mox, or for Lane Kiffin? Or is this going to be one of those where where you think people spend a little bit too much on this?
I have not seen the results of the way too early draft. I'm waiting for the show patiently next week to see where he went. But I like Lukash. I mean, I just think he's a good player. And I think he, like you said earlier, he's athletic. He is certainly like a weapon after the catch too. If they just keep stuff short with him. I like the player. I am willing to discount part of last year's struggles because he got hurt in the middle of 2023 and he was coming back. And I know it's not the most serious injury in the world, but recovering from an injury still takes time, getting your feet under you. And he was only a sophomore, right? He'd only played 5 games of football in his collegiate career before entering this year. So yeah, it was a down year. I'm willing to give him a couple excuses, especially Taylor Green's quarterback. What do you want him to do exactly? I was, by the way, little aside, I was shocked when I looked at earlier today and I saw Taylor Green pass for 3,100 yards. I couldn't believe the number was that high. But yeah, I like Hash the player. I just think he's good. And you already noted, Lane Kiffin has utilized the tight end when they're a weapon on the offense. So what if the answer to, is it Caden Lee, is it Deshaun Stribling, is it somebody else? What if it's Lukash who kind of takes a big role in this passing game as a bigger body guy? I don't know. I feel like
we asked the same question of Michael Trigg and Caden Prescorn the last couple of years. Now, Caden Prescorn had himself a good year as well. Don't get me wrong, but
yeah, Prescorn was also moving up from we've seen Hash do it in the SEC before, right?
That's very true.
We had never seen Trigg do it outside a couple spring games, and Prescorn was coming in from Memphis, right? So we have seen Hash be really good at the SEC level. I think it's just going to come down to utilization. I tend to think that they're bringing him in again, kind of like Clark. I think you're prioritizing him monetarily. You probably want to prioritize him with snaps and design plays for him. I would think.
Mm-hmm. I will say, Mox, I'll leave the Haas conversation with this. He did not go in the way too early draft.
Wow, that's surprising me because I think he's a top 10 tight end.
All right, next guy up here, Arlis Boardingham, a guy that absolutely did go in our way too early draft. Going from Florida down to Bowling Green. I mean, I get it, right? 4-star prospect who has produced in the SEC somewhat, transferring down to the MAC, which specifically to a MAC school that just gave us a record-breaking tight end in Harold Fannin. Yeah, I can see why people would be somewhat excited about this, right? It's not like this guy's been a 0 in his college career so far. Now, obviously a bit of a disappointing year this year with Florida. He produced less this year than he did in his freshman year, so probably a good reason why he was transferring out. He seems to be falling out of favor with that staff, but you can't really ask for a better spot than the place that just gave us Harold Fannin, 100 receptions, 1,342 yards, 9 touchdowns. Is it more complicated than that, Mox? Is he worth taking just because of the landing spot here?
I tend to think that I will have very little of him, and that's a product of how high I think he will go in drafts. Because I think you're just going to attach the Bowling Green tag to him and say, all right, we're done. Highly used player. We just saw what Harold Fannin did really 2 years in a row. And before that, Christian Sims too, right? It wasn't just the Harold Fannin thing. Like Scott Loeffler's offense prioritizes the tight end a lot. Sims had really good years there too, probably multiple top 12 finishes. Can Arlis Boardingham play tight end? Is he more than an average athlete? I know he was really highly rated, but I'm looking at his data, and the only thing that he does above average is he's a good burst score, 82nd percentile, agility score 17th percentile, speed score 51st percentile. So whatever, average.
Yeah.
I just have questions about who that player is because we've seen him in the SEC, but like, I don't know, he had like 300 yards last year or 2 years ago, and that was kind of his big game. Like he only had 26 targets last year. He only averaged 7.1 yards per reception. He's never had a game where I take that back. One game in his entire collegiate career where he has had an average depth of target more than 10 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Like -4, 1, 2, 2.2, 4, 5.3. Those are his average depth targets for Florida this last year. Like, can the guy operate outside of that role with the ball in his hands? I mean, he's probably a better athlete than most of the conference in the MAC. He has the pedigree, right? Like, this was a highly regarded recruit. I just don't know if he's any good. But how much does that matter?
How much does that matter when he's playing in the MAC, right? Like,
how much does it matter?
Like you're like you said, even if he's an average athlete for the like an SEC level, right? Like that's more than good enough to overcome a lot of deficiencies in the MAC. I mean, shoot, look how Harold Fannin looked at the Senior Bowl this week, right? Like once you put Harold Fannin out there with a bunch of other guys that play at the Power 4 level, he doesn't quite stand out as much, but obviously Harold Fannin was dominant in the MAC this year. So I think it'll be interesting to see. Go ahead.
Where do you so you have already seen him go off the board, I presume.
Yes.
Like he's going to be drafted as a top 5 tight end. I think he's drafted as a top 5 tight end, at least in the early drafts, would be my thought. Like I don't know that I want to take Arlis Boardingham as a top 5 tight end. That's like I totally get the position. I totally get the offense utilization. Little scary to me because I don't know that I think that highly of the player.
I will be curious to see as we do deeper and deeper drafts to see. Again, I want to like in this way too early draft because that required everybody to take a tight end. It did kind of force up the value of tight ends a little bit, right? Whether it's people taking him around earlier than potentially you're looking at, because again, everybody kind of knew that like the tight end run was coming once you're getting into the last few rounds of the way too early draft there. Once we go into like deeper drafts, you get 30 rounds. I'm curious to see like where the top tight ends end up getting pushed down to, right? Do they stay in the round 7 range, which is where the first tight ends came off in this draft, or do they kind of move down to the round 9-10 range? If it's round 9-10, I have zero problem with taking Arlis Boardingham at that point, because at that point you're looking at just any tight end pick is just shooting for upside in that range, because normal years, like if you have a safe and good tight end, they're going in like round 4, 5, 6 range, right? Last year you saw the first tight ends coming off the board around 6, 7 range. With a bigger crapshoot this year, maybe that goes down a little bit further. If they do go down a little bit further, I have no problem with Boardingham. The other thing about Boardingham, right? Again, he's transferring out for a reason, as I mentioned, not utilized as much this year. You talk about his ADOT. ADOT's also a product of system, right? Take me playing CFP 25, for example. Not that this is a one-to-one comparison, but like when I utilize the tight end, you know what I constantly do with my tight ends? They're running drag routes all the time because they're a very good safety valve for me when I can't see anything downfield, right? That ADOT would look very, very low. I'm not saying that's what happened at Florida, but I'm saying that maybe that's part of the reason why Boardingham got out of there, because he's like, I'm sick of having only 5 yards down the field targets. Maybe he wants to go a little bit deeper. I don't know. Last guy on the board here, Mox. I don't really have much to say on him other than the fact that he was great last year. We'll find out if he'll be good in this system. But that's Terrence Carter, the tight end out of Louisiana, was tight end 10 last year. He's transferring over to Texas Tech, which just got done making Jalen Conyers the tight end 25 on the year. Granted, that was a little bit boosted with some goal line carries that led to some touchdowns for Conyers there. So maybe this ends up being a complete kaput for Carter here at Texas Tech. But do you think that this is a spot where Carter can potentially be successful?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about this offense kind of losing a couple pieces from the receiving room. Yeah, they've added too, so I don't want to say like it's not all lost, but Carter to me is a player who I think was just straight up like better than his peers. Just like straight up better, like significantly so. I think he should be playing at the Power 4 level. Does that mean that he's going to come in and have a 700-yard season for Texas Tech? Probably not. But he's pretty athletic. Like, he's the type of guy that I want to be targeting. I think he's athletic. I think he's proven production. I think, he's utilized a little bit further downfield than Borningham is, for example. But, like, how often do you see a tight end whose average yak per reception is over 8? Like, per reception.
Good Lord.
That's pretty cool. And yeah, like, you could say Louisiana was beating up on some bad teams, and they absolutely were. But that's pretty dominant, man. Like, it was pretty impressive, I think, what we saw him do last year. Like, I just think he's a good player. And I want to be betting on a good player more than I want to be betting on a bad player in a good position. I think almost every time. So I think I'll probably have a good bit of Carter depending on where he ends up going. I like this spot too, because like you said, like Conyers got some pretty good run last year. And I think he's a better player than Conyers is. So maybe the offense, features him a little bit. And, we have Mac Leftwich taking over, right? So that wasn't an offense that utilized the tight end at all.
No.
I find it hard to believe that they would bring him in and not use him. Or maybe they just told him, hey, we want to use you, and they won't. Feels like a waste of resources. But I like Carter the player. So I'll probably draft a good bit of him.
Well, as I kind of touched on with Claire, right? A lot of times these systems, which might utilize the slot receiver a little bit more, it's not unheard of for them, especially if they have a, more athletic, more receiver-like tight end, to kind of switch the role over to that, right? If they don't have anybody that really stands out in the slot position. Because thinking of Texas Tech, right? They bring in Reginald Virgil, who is an outside wide receiver. Otherwise, who do they got in the slot, really, that stands out right now? Because that's a position that gets fed in Leftwich's system. Maybe they kind of brought Carter in saying, hey, we'll use you as a tight end, but we're also going to flex you out to the slot quite a bit, right? In which case, that could be a good path to production here. Who knows?
Yeah, I think he's good. I think he's a good tight end. I really do. I think he's athletic. I think he can translate to the next level. So count me in on Carter.
All right, next group of tight ends. This is the last group of transfer tight ends that we'll be touching on here. We're only going through 10 of them here today. Bauer Sharp, the former Oklahoma tight end, headed over to LSU. We got Rocky Beers, the tight end out of Florida International, headed over to Colorado State. We got Dorian Fleming, the tight end out of Georgia State. He is headed to Maryland. We also got Alex Bowman, the tight end out of Tulane, headed over to Miami of Florida. And then last but not least, we got Kamorian Pimpton going from LSU over to TCU. So, Mox, let's start with Bauer Sharp here. Receiving option number 1 for Oklahoma last year, I think just by default. Because, again, Oklahoma lost every receiver under the sun, it felt like. And Sharp was really the only consistent option they could probably get on a week-by-week basis here. And even then, didn't really finish the year with a great stat line. 42 receptions for 324 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's moving over to LSU. LSU, obviously, Brian Kelly's the head coach here. And people love a Brian Kelly tight end, right? Mason Taylor just got done with being tight end 24 last year. Side note, by the way, I got a lot of crap for having Taylor at tight end 26 last year in my preseason rankings, and he finishes tight end 24, so I just want to say, ha! Regardless of anything else, though, I get why people like Brian Kelly tight ends, but just look at his extensive history at Notre Dame, right? My question is, I know people are going to be in on Bauer Sharp already going to this system, but are we sure that Sharp is going to be the next Brian Kelly tight end? Are we even sure he's even that great of a tight end? He came up from the FCS level last year. And like I said, just was tight end 1 and receiver 1 for Oklahoma last year just by default because everybody else got hurt. Now he's moving to LSU. And I think there's legit competition here. Again, Trey'Dez Green had himself a phenomenal finish to the year. 13 receptions, 101 yards, and 4 touchdowns as a true freshman. And if you watch that bowl game, he looked dominant. And he's also playing basketball for LSU as well. There's some highlights of him out there playing basketball for them. Dude is just a complete freak of nature. And I guess this is my opportunity to have this discussion of I personally think I'll let other people draft Sharp. I'll take the shot on Trey'Dez Green and his athleticism. What do you think, Mox?
Do you think people are going to draft Sharp over Green? Because
yes.
to me, it's very clearly Green's job with Sharp brought in his depth of position. They brought in Donovan Green too.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
So like they needed to address depth at the position, but like I don't know, like Bauer Sharp was fine at Southeast Louisiana. They were like betting on his size and athleticism, and like it translates, I guess, to an extent. And like he was the only thing that kind of worked in that receiving game once Burks went down last year. But I don't know. I think I'd rather bet on Trades Green because we've already seen him do it in the offense. So
I would agree.
I just don't have a strong opinion on Bauer Sharp. I feel like the player, like I think he's fine. Like he's like a good tight end too in the SEC. Like and I think that's gonna be his role.
What about Rocky Beers here, Mox? For those of you wondering why I'm talking about Rocky Beers, one, great meme name, but two, going from Florida International to Colorado State. I already kind of liked Beers at Florida International. Now he's headed over to Colorado State, where Jay Norvell's tight ends need no introduction, right? Think about Cole Turner at Nevada. Think about just 2 years ago with Dallin Holker in 2023, right? Is this an opportunity where we can have the ultimate dream meme here and have Rocky Beers become an actual key CFF player in 2025 box, or are we trying to force this?
If you can't get on the field at Florida International for 2 years, I'm not sure how interested I am in you as a player. Great name. And he has the second best name among his siblings. His brother, Rowdy Beers, is even cooler name.
That's true.
But I don't know. Like, if you can't get on the field and contribute at Florida International, doesn't that say something more about you as like where you're at as a player? That's kind of the thought process that I have with that.
It's like super weird though, because again, he had 18 receptions in 2023, and then he had 4 this past year. So it's like, what happened there?
Oh shoot! You know what? He got hurt the first game of the year, didn't he?
Yes, he did. I think.
I totally forgot about. That's on me. I totally forgot.
Yes, he did. Yep, he did not play another snap.
Yes. Okay. So take back everything I said about trashing him. We can cut that. We can cut that in post. I don't have a strong opinion on the player though. Like we saw him in one game against Indiana. Targets got hurt. What exactly is the expectation for Beers moving forward? How healthy is he? Another thing. He's a guy that I'll probably watch and read like news on. And just say, hey, like, where's this trending? Because yeah, I mean, think about how great the tight end has been for Norvell for years and years and years.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because that offense you wouldn't think utilizes tight end, but he really likes to utilize that position. Yeah, he's a guy that I'm paying attention to. I forgot he got hurt. So I was like, man, this guy stunk last year. I was like,
just ouch.
I don't remember. Yeah. So I just don't have a strong opinion. It's like we haven't seen enough of the player to really give, I think, a good assessment on who he is or like what he is or what he can excel in.
Yeah.
I do think it's interesting that Colorado State brought him in because Colorado State is a much more well-resourced program than FIU is. So that tells me that they probably wanted him and did a little bit of money to get him.
No, I can definitely see that for sure. And like Norvell, he knows what works with that offense, right? It's part of the reason why he went and grabbed Lewis Brown again, right? He's trying to bring back the pieces that have worked in the past, and he knows his offense works best when he has a top tier tight end. I will say though, one name we can't really forget about is oh my God, what's his name? He got hurt right before the start of the season. He was a true freshman last year. Jackson something. Oh my God! What? What'd you say?
Can I call a line? Like in a play?
Line,
yeah, what is
please.
his name? Jackson Warren.
Jackson Warren, yes. Jackson Warren, yep. We can't forget about him, I don't think. Because again, he got hurt. Obviously, he's out for the year, but they were really excited about him. But you know how that goes sometimes.
Yeah, and he didn't even play a snap, did he?
No, he did not. He was out the entire year.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting. I am tracking this position because it's been one that's been really successful for a while.
What about Dorian Fleming here? A sneaky good tight end last year in college fantasy. Really kind of flew under the radar a lot of times. at Georgia State there, finishes tight end 11 on the year. He's transferring. He's going to Maryland, which has kind of featured that tight end / wide receiver hybrid before. Think of your Corey Dyches in 2023 and 2022, where he finished right there in the tight end 22, tight end 25 range. What do we think, Mox? Is this another scenario where just bet on the system here?
I think he's a combination of good player and good system. Personally, like I liked what I saw from him last year, and he was pretty consistent kind of the whole season. Like he didn't really there were a few weeks where he let you down, but like it wasn't like he came on hot or finished strong. Like he was pretty good throughout the whole year. He's an interesting player because he doesn't line up in line more than half the time. That tells me that he's a good that Georgia State deployed him as a receiver, and I think Maryland would probably do very similarly. If he was blocking more, that would be more of a cause for concern. And I don't think he's a bad pass blocker. I think he's okay. But I really like the fit. Like he's not a big like lumbering tight end. He's pretty athletic, I think. We don't have any data on him. But when I watch him, I'm like, yeah, this dude's definitely one of the better athletes on the field every time he plays. And that's one thing at Georgia State, and it's another thing in the Big Ten.
Yeah.
But I like the fit. Like I think he's actually really slides into Dyches is a similar type player as him, I think. So, I certainly think Maryland wants to use him. And I don't think they would have gone out and gotten a guy like Fleming unless they had plans. And I keep saying that over and over, but like it is important to think about what players are chosen to replace maybe a big piece of the offense.
Yep.
Like I think that's a very intentional versus adding depth. And I think Fleming is a intentional addition, not necessarily a depth addition. And he was only a redshirt freshman last year. So like there could be a higher ceiling here.
Ooh, I'll be real. I was just like in my head, I was kind of thinking of him as a guy that was already, 3-4 years into his career already. That's good to know. What about Alex Bowman here, or Bauman? Not sure which one off the top of my head, but going from Tulane to Miami of Florida, it's a guy that I've liked at Tulane the last couple of years. Never really kind of broke out there, but he's going to Miami of Florida, who Miami, like the Hurricanes have had a lot of really good tight ends for CFF over the years. And last year they had their latest one with Elijah Arroyo, finished as tight end 13 on the year. I think that Bauman could fit into this, although I don't really know how much of Bauman's really going to be able to replicate what Arroyo was, because Arroyo absolutely was just a full-on receiving threat for this offense last year, right? He was very much deployed in that way. Bauman, probably a bit more hybrid than I would say. Like hybrid in terms of splitting pass blocking duties versus, being received versus Arroyo. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I don't remember Arroyo being deployed as a blocker very much. In addition, Bauman will be playing with Carson Beck, who knows how to utilize the tight end, obviously. They'll know what to look for. Not that that's super important, but it is just something to kind of throw out there. What do you think, Mox?
Yeah, Bauman's a pretty traditional type tight end, right? Like a guy who block, he's bigger, he's like 6'5", probably 255-ish, 250 plus at least. He just wasn't all that productive the last 2 years at Tulane, and I'm just wondering if there's a higher ceiling there. Like, is there a player there that can get you 500 yards receiving? I don't know. The other concern that I have is what the hell is Miami going to do with Elijah Lofton? Because he's a tight end, but also a running back, also a player they're going to give carries to, and he's a really versatile weapon for the offense. But a lot of those snaps he takes are at tight end. So are they going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets? And that's possible. Maybe they do because they don't have good receiving depth coming back. Mm-hmm. And I could certainly see that, right? That wouldn't really track with how I think the offense runs traditionally. So it would have to be a change in offensive scheme. I don't know.
I mean, they're going to have they will be changing the offensive scheme this year because, again, Cam Ward and Carson Beck are 2 very different players, right? Like, Ward can use his legs. Beck can run, but, that's just not his game, right? So they're going to be changing things up already. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring in Bauman just to try to get Lofton, different Elijah, try to get him more snaps at running back. Because, again, they lose Damian Martinez. They didn't really bring in anybody through the portal, if I remember correctly. And so that leaves Mark Fletcher, and they'll need Obviously, was it Chris Johnson, the other running back that they had back there? I can't remember the freshman this year.
They got a million guys that look like the exact same player. So to be honest,
But
but yeah, they have Fletcher coming back, and they have who
this is a day. This is a day to forget in terms of us remembering names off the top of our
Oh no,
heads.
it's Jordan Lyle. Jordan Lyle's gonna be the RB2.
Yes, that's who I was trying to think of. I'm like, Chris Johnson. What am I even thinking of? What am I even doing? Chris Johnson. Okay, he is still there. He just only had 6 carries last year. You know, how did I remember his name but not Jordan Lyle? What about this last guy here, Mox? Kamorian Pimpton here out of LSU. He is going to TCU, a offense that has given us the likes of Jared Wiley back in 2023. Obviously, Sonny Dykes has had some great tight ends during his time at SMU, as I'll kind of go into more depth later, but TCU vacates over 240 targets between Savion Williams, Jack Beck, and JP Richardson. That doesn't even include Dabney. Lot of opportunity here for Pimpton to kind of come in and take some of those targets potentially here. He's a former 4-star guy, so he got some recruiting pedigree there as well. Should be able to stand out, and he was producing for LSU somewhat last year. Like, he wasn't a complete zero for that offense either. So, what do we think, Mox?
Yeah, a really interesting player, I think, because I kind of don't know what to expect from him, because I don't know that. I think the athletic ceiling is there, and I think the athletic upside is there. And I didn't really like that he ended up going to LSU. He was a really late flip in the cycle. Like, he was a guy that I think Vanderbilt had identified really early.
Ah, dang.
And didn't go there, and that would have been a fun fit, right? He's athletic. I think he's got the size you want. A player that, we had a disappointing outcome for TCU tight ends in 2024. Is that player related, or is that they are moving away from that position? I think maybe it's a little bit of both, but I don't really love Dabney the player.
To me, TCU stealing Dabney from their rivals, Baylor, and then flat out refusing to use him was one of the most diabolical moves the team made last year. If that is indeed what ended up happening, because like that's a whole different level of rival pettiness. If that's what they did, pay your rival's best player to come to you and then just don't use them.
Yeah, that was kind of funny. I don't know. I like the player. I think he's a really high end athlete, and maybe it didn't work out for LSU because there was a lot of depth in that room.
Oh yeah,
and I like the players that were ahead of him on the depth chart. Like, it's not a bad thing if it just doesn't work out there. Yeah. He's a really, really highly rated recruit too. Like, there are a lot of reasons to like Pimpton the player, and tight end takes a little bit longer to develop. So. I don't know how high he's going to go in drafts, if he even gets drafted at all. But he's the type of player I think I would take a late flyer on.
I would agree. All right, that's enough of those tight ends. We'll get to some more tight ends later, but those will be FCS tight ends. Let's hop into probably the more exciting portion of this episode here today. Of course, we're getting to it 45 minutes in. Let's talk about some of these FCS transfers, Mox. We got some guys coming up from the FCS ranks, some of them going all the way to Power 4, some of them going to G5 schools. I'm particularly interested in a lot of these guys coming up from the FCS going to these G5 spots because of the transfer portal and everything. I think that the line between the upper tier of FCS and the lower tier of G5 is getting more and more blurred than ever before, right? And I think that provides a lot of opportunity for these guys to move into some of these schools, especially in the MAC, the Mountain West, Sun Belt, and they have opportunities to start immediately, right? There's not really a huge jump up in competition there compared to, like, say, even a guy going from like Georgia State to, I don't know, like Kansas State or something like that, right? I think there's a lot of opportunity for these guys to produce early. You don't have to wait as much. So we'll get to plenty of guys like that. We'll start with our first 5 guys here on the board here. 5 quarterbacks that we're taking a look at here. Number 1, Maverick MacGyver, the quarterback out of Abilene Christian, headed over to Western Kentucky. He's following his offensive coordinator there. Obviously, we got our eye on that. Mark Gronowski, the quarterback out of South Dakota State, jumping up all the way to Iowa. That doesn't sound exciting, but Mox, I'm sure, will explain to you here why you should definitely keep an eye on him. Jack Lane, the quarterback out of Idaho, following his head coach from Idaho to New Mexico. Obviously, they'll be very familiar with each other. Jackson Proctor, the quarterback out of Dartmouth, going to NIU. And then last year on this page, Zach Calzada, the former Auburn and LSU quarterback, heading to... No. Was it Auburn and what other team? Was it Texas A&M?
A&M.
Texas A&M, that was it. Former Auburn and Texas A&M quarterback, then headed to Incarnate Word, now headed up back to the SEC to Kentucky. So, Mox, we'll start with the first guy here, Maverick MacGyver. I'd say probably if you were doing an FCS-only transfer draft, this guy would be the 101. Would he not?
Yeah, I think he's clear and far and away the top FCS CFF transfer in terms of fantasy production. I'm not sure there's a player that's a better fit for what the offense is doing. Rick Bowie and what Helton's run in the past are Rick Bowie was the offensive coordinator at Abilene Christian. He took that job at Western Kentucky, brought in MacGyver with him. Really similar offenses, right? They're not going to change a lot of the concepts.
Yep.
It's also Abilene Christian was a pretty good team last year. They almost beat Texas Tech. They probably should have if you watched the first week of the season. They kind of got screwed. I'm not sure that the United Athletic, which is the conference that Abilene Christian is in, is that much worse than average CUSA. Abilene Christian probably could have been a top 3-4 team in CUSA last year. That is the level that he is going to and from, right? I would have had them ranked right around Louisiana Tech. So an average CUSA team. Western Kentucky's a little bit of a step up. Not a whole lot though. Really, this is not a player who is taking a massive jump. I don't think. And we've seen him excel. He's been a starter there for a long time. He started at Texas Tech, went to Abilene Christian. He's been, 30 plus starts under his belt. So this is a dude who can play. We know what we're getting with him. I'm excited about the fit for sure.
Yeah, I took a look at what his production gave us last year, right? And he is full disclosure, he is a full pocket passer. You're not getting much on the legs here.
Yes.
But if you took his 13 games last year and extrapolated back down to 12 games, you would get a 3,500-yard passer, 28 touchdowns, a little bit on the ground, about 71 yards. So you're roughly looking at about 260.5 fantasy points. That would have been good for QB 31 last year. I personally think that he can match that again this year, right? And I think it'll help that, again, he should be the starter for the full year, right? Caden Veltkamp finished his QB 35 last year with, in my opinion, a worse offensive coordinator, right? And with him not really getting the start to start the year and having a much stronger second half. Veltkamp finished top 20 in CFF quarterbacks in the second half of the season. Now, granted, that was heavily boosted by him giving 7 rushing touchdowns, but we've also seen that Clay Helton, even if he doesn't have a rushing quarterback, he is not afraid to put him under center and do a QB sneak at the goal line. So I do think that there is a opportunity for MacGyver to, 3-4 rushing touchdowns throughout the year just from opportunities like that. I don't think is outside the bag at all. And considering that they lost their best running back in Elijah Young, I don't really know if they have anybody else that they would trust along the goal line there. By the way, another thing I just want to add real quick as a side note, I'm going to be referencing a lot of these FCS transfers stats and extrapolating it down to 12 games. I want to be very clear that not with all of these guys am I saying that means that is what they're going to do in the FBS level, right? I'm mostly trying to get the point across of just how productive these guys were at their previous stops, so you can compare it to what kind of production you can compare it to what the production looks like in the FBS level, right? So that these guys aren't just randos coming up from the SBS. We're talking about some of the best from the FCS that are coming up to the FBS here. So I guess I don't think I explained that well, but basically don't take every stat that I read off about extrapolating to 12 games and saying what they would have finished as last year as me saying they're going to do that again next year. We'll definitely break it down. Speaking of a guy that I don't think that applies to at all, Mark Gronowski, quarterback out of South Dakota State. He's headed over to Iowa. I will go ahead and tell you again, 14 games last year, 2,500 yards passing, 22 touchdowns, 365 yards, 9 touchdowns on the ground. If you extrapolate that to 12 games, 2,300 yards passing, 20 touchdowns, 337 yards on the ground, 8 touchdowns on the ground. That gets you about 263 fantasy points that have been good for QB 26 last year. This is one of the bigger jump ups. Obviously, South Dakota State, one of the best programs in the FCS, so I do think that he would perform pretty well at most stops. We saw that he had the opportunity technically to follow his head coach to Washington State, but a program like Iowa went out of their way to get him out of the portal. So I do think that says a lot about Gronowski's skills here. My question is, do we expect him to perform nearly as well as he did in the Big 12, especially without, Caleb Johnson there to provide a lot of relief in that running game there? What do you think, Mox?
So the upside I think that he has is with his legs. And I wouldn't call him like a special athlete or like a great runner at all. But he's big and he can like run you over and he's tough. Like he's a tough, big player. That results in touchdowns at the goal line. Like it just does. Like he will, I think, get those opportunities in spades for Iowa this year. And I think that's what really interests me about the player. Because I think he's a good passer, right? Like 70% plus adjusted completion percentage, like multiple years in a row, highly efficient, highly productive. Like South Dakota State is like, I don't know, it's like an average Big Ten team. Like that's kind of how good there was. Missouri Valley Conference is probably one of the better conferences in the FCS. So like he's been playing okay competition. It is a big step up. I don't want to like minimize that, but it's not like he's going from like D3. He's going from a team that is consistently successful. So it's a little concerning, but I certainly think he's the best quarterback that they've had in the last how many years?
Oh yeah,
like 5.
The bar is in hell on that. Like you don't have to jump very hard.
I just think the rushing upside is kind of interesting. That's really what attracts me to the player. Like, can he throw for 250 and get me like a rushing touchdown? I think that's possible. Like, I don't think that's a negative asset. Like, that's a draftable quarterback to me. I think if you're expecting him to finish the top 24 quarterback, like, good luck. Like, it's Iowa. But I will say they went from like a bottom 5-10 offense in terms of EPA per play to I think 72nd last year. Like that's a huge jump up offensively the first year under Tim Lester. So like, what if,
amazing what can happen when you get rid of your nepotism.
I think there's just the opportunity here for him to exceed expectations based on what people think. Oh, an Iowa quarterback, gross. Well, what if he's like your quarterback 4 on your team? Like that's not a bad place to be in, and like he could probably be an okay bye week filler.
And he'll go.
I'm not like preaching to the world. I'm just saying like he could be okay.
I mean, like he can. Again, he'll go super cheap. Like you said, nobody's really going out of their way to grab an Iowa quarterback. You can grab him pretty much as late as you want. My only concern is, again, like you look back at his rushing performances, right? He doesn't really have the yards that go with the touchdowns a lot of times, right? So he's very touchdown dependent in that regard, right? And so if he doesn't get those touchdowns for whatever reason, maybe another Caleb Johnson 2.0 shows up and they get all the touchdowns and everything, that could ruin your day. But also, like we said, an Iowa quarterback's going to go super late. Are you going to feel that bad about it? Probably not. What about Jack Lane?
Not. And with the last thing I'll say on the touchdowns is, he's not a good athlete. Yeah, he doesn't run a whole lot. Yeah, like all of those things. His last 3 seasons, he had 12, 8, and 10. Like the dude just gets touchdowns because he's just big and can wants to run you over. I don't know. Fun player, cheap player.
Oh yeah. What about Jack Lane, quarterback going from Idaho to New Mexico? I already mentioned he's following his not his offensive coordinator, his head coach to New Mexico there. Was the starter last year, got hurt versus Oregon, right? So he only ended up playing 6 games on the year. If you extrapolate it to 12 games, you're looking at a just under 3,000 yard passer, 28 touchdowns, about 130 yards on the ground, 2 touchdowns there. So you would have probably finished just if you replicate that in New Mexico, you're looking at about a QB 36 here, Right. So, Mox, what are you feeling here? Do you think that this could get even higher, considering the fact that we know that New Mexico's defense is horrendous? What do you think?
Lane is interesting because I thought he was in line for a really strong year before getting hurt. And when we saw him, like, he was pretty good. The difference between what I think Idaho was able to do last year and last couple of years, really, like, he replaced Giovanni McCoy as a starter this season. Their defense was really good. It's like he didn't have to drop back a lot. Like he dropped back. He didn't attempt more than 30 passes in a single game this season. He didn't have to. The offense is highly efficient. He's a pretty aggressive downfield passer, actually. Like, they hit explosives with him. Now, I don't think the weapons are going to be as good. They lost a couple of their top guys to, like, Power 4 schools. But I think Lane's a pretty good quarterback for the New Mexico level. So what is the ceiling there? If they're going to be in a lot of shootouts, I don't think it's Devin Dampier because the dude doesn't run.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there is 3,000 passing yard upside. Like, I think that is in the range of outcomes, just because of how bad the defense is and how many times they're going to have to throw. And I think the offense is pretty creative. So all of that tells me draftable quarterback.
Draftable quarterback, and I got my fingers crossed on Keegan Johnson, as we discussed last week. What about Jackson Proctor here and Zach Calzada? We'll kind of throw both these guys in here together here, because I don't think I'm definitely not excited about Calzada. Proctor, I'm a little bit more interested in, but again, we'll see like how that kind of plays out here, right? If you took Jackson Proctor's production last year, he only played in 7 games, took over in week 4, missed, weeks 7 through 9, right? If you take his 7 games, extrapolate them to 12 games, you're looking at 2,700 yard passing, 22 touchdowns through the air, 653 yards and 7 touchdowns on the ground. Like, this dude can run. His fantasy total would have gotten him QB 11 last year if he can replicate that at Northern Illinois here. Question is, can he? I personally think that the jump from Ivy League to MAC probably isn't as big, but who knows? Maybe he was running off of Keggy the Keg magic here. Mox, what do you think of Proctor at NIU? Real quick, we got to keep it moving.
So, I can't talk about all these guys for a million years.
You could.
I love the rushing upside here. I could, yeah, theoretically. I love the rushing upside. I think he is I wouldn't say crazy athlete. I wouldn't say he's crazy fast, but he's pretty good on the ground. Like, he's mobile. He avoids sacks really well, which helps him a lot. I just think he's a really solid quarterback, and I'm pretty sure he's going to start for NIU. Like, I don't think it's Holson. I've talked to a couple of NIU people who tend to agree that Proctor's going to get the job. I don't think it's a giant step up in competition either. The real question that I have is, will NIU at any point allow him to pass the ball? Because they have not averaged 200 yards per passing in a game since the COVID season.
Christ.
That's not a recipe for success. I think I think he is a decent quarterback. I really do. I think the rushing upside's really fun. I think I will take him in the last round of drafts, a late round pick. I'm just concerned the passing upside just won't be there. And that's really going to limit his ceiling, because I think he'll run, and I think he can run.
But again, how much is that dependent on what Northern Illinois has had in terms of their options, right? I'm trying to look them up real quick, but I know Ethan Hampton, right? That's not great.
For sure. But I think the intent of the offense, and I think what Hammock wants to do as a coach, is complementary football. We have a good defense, and we just are going to run the ball down your throat and play slow. Mm-hmm. That's not necessarily a big.
I forgot Rocky Lombardi was their quarterback for a while.
Yeah, I thought Lombardi was fine, right? I don't know. I am a little concerned about the passing upside for sure. Mm-hmm. I'm not totally writing him off though because of how good the rushing stuff could be. That is he's a late round guy that I'm going to end up taking in drafts just because I think the upside exists, mm-hmm. even if it's not super sexy.
What about the last guy here? Zach Calzada, quarterback out of Incarnate Word, headed to Kentucky. I don't know how the hell this guy isn't out of eligibility at this point, but he had himself a really nice year this past year at Incarnate Word, but every quarterback does appears at Incarnate Word. I could probably pass for 3,000 yards at Incarnate Word, it turns out. But regardless, again, he had himself a really nice year. 3,200 yards, 30 touchdowns, 400 on the ground, 4 touchdowns on the ground, so QB 11. to kind of give you perspective on how much production that is. He comes into Kentucky. Kentucky had a massive dud in Brock Vandegrift last year. Completely killed their season. Calzada wasn't great at either Auburn or Texas A&M, so it does kind of feel weird that, Kentucky's solution to their massive dud last year is to bring in another guy that's kind of been a dud at two SEC programs. But who knows? Maybe we get like a Kenny Pickett style season where it's just the fact that he's so mature compared to a lot of the players he's playing against. Maybe that helps him out. I tend to doubt it. I tend to think that Mark Stoops will be enjoying retirement and or looking for a job next season. What do you think, Box?
We have a sample size in the same league against the same schedule that was pretty poor. I find it really hard to believe that Zach Calzada is the answer for Kentucky. I think he'll start. I don't think they have a better quarterback. I'm not sure they have a better quarterback on the roster. And I like Cutter Boley some. I don't think he's going to get the job. I don't know what the upside here is for Calzada. I don't think he's a draftable quarterback. It's funny because he's such a highly rated recruit on 24/7, right? And you're like, well, he was awesome at Incarnate Word. So is everybody else. And we've already seen him. And I don't think the rushing stuff is going to translate the same to the SEC. I think he has decision-making problems. He holds the ball for too long. So that's going to result in more sacks.
Yep.
Who the hell is he throwing to? What are the weapons for Kentucky?
Yeah.
The whole situation kind of just sucks. So when I'm looking at Calzada, what about this situation is attractive to me? Because I don't think there is anything. And that's player and team and fit. All of it is just no.
Yeah, I agree. Nothing really exciting about that. I got a couple more quarterbacks we want to touch on here. First up is Cam Coleman, the quarterback out of Richmond, headed over to James Madison. A lot of people assume that job is Matthew Sluka's. I think Mox will kind of throw out the case here for Cam Coleman potentially. And then CJ Montez, the quarterback out of Fordham, injured and is set to transfer to Kent State now. So Mox, I guess we'll run through these two guys real quick here. What are we thinking with these two?
So I was not originally going to put Cam Coleman on this list. And then I heard people talking, burning the red shirt, not to name names, I'll say it, about Sluka. I think Cam Coleman is a better player than Matthew Sluka is right now. He's a good passer of the football, something Sluka is not. He's a legit rusher. He could get the job done with his legs, and he's going to provide value with that. Alonzo Barnett, people might be asking, why are we not talking about him? I would be surprised if he played in 2025 based on everything coming out of James Madison. Mm-hmm. And if he does, maybe he plays late in the season. I don't think we're going to see him.
Which is unfortunate.
I was really, it sucks because I thought he had taken a real step in his development. I like Coleman a lot. I think he's a better player than Sluka is at the same stage in their careers. Do I think he's going to get the job? Sluka has the benefit of knowing the head coach. He was his quarterback for a handful of years at Holy Cross, right? They have a built-in relationship. The thing that always got me about this whole Sluka thing in general was, why didn't he just go with him to James Madison? Why did he go to UNLV? UNLV is, as I understand it, is not as well resourced as James Madison. Did Bob Chesney just now want him? Did he say, I can get somebody else? I like what I have in Alonzo Barnett. I like what I have in whoever. Was that the path he took? Because it's just weird to me. But I think Coleman could be a real fantasy contributor if he gets the job. Because he is a dual threat. He's not going to run for 200 yards a game like Sluka can, but he can get you 50 yards a game on the ground, possibly 60 yards a game on the ground on average.
No, I agree 100%. That's absolutely a spot that we have to be looking out for. What about Montez at Kent State, right? Kent State, probably the worst program in the FBS. I know for a fact that you have them ranked lower than a good number of FCS programs, right? So that tells me that Montez should have talented enough easily to start for Kent State. What kind of upside can we potentially look at here? If you extrapolate his totals from last year to 12 games, you're looking at Montez, passing for about 3,300 yards, 28 touchdowns, 350 yards on the ground, 3 touchdowns. That would have gotten you QB 15 last year. I think he can possibly replicate that in the MAC here. What do you think, Mox?
He was awesome in 2023. He's really, really good. and then he got hurt. We didn't see him.
Yeah.
So what are we getting from him? Because when we saw his first two healthy games of the year, Bowling Green didn't have a strong showing. Central Connecticut didn't have a strong showing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what to expect from him because his 2023 was so awesome. And 2024 started pretty bad. What is his upside? Do we even want to roster a Kent State quarterback?
Yeah.
Is kind of thing I keep going back to. And there's
because who's you throwing to? Because McCray's not there anymore. Luke Flory, I think, is out of eligibility. I mean, I liked Deshaun Martin. He's a true freshman that started for them last year, but he didn't really do much either.
Yeah, the rushing stuff, I go back and forth on this because, like, I think he can run. I think I was a little harsh when I said he was a 0 on the ground in the show sheet. That was probably a little harsh because he can run a little bit, but he takes like some of the worst sacks I've ever seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Like he had, like I believe it was Central Connecticut, negative 94 yards rushing.
Oh my God.
Negative 94. That's almost impossible to do.
I don't know if I could do. I don't even know if I could replicate that in CFP 25.
On Heisman mode, playing as Kent State, you might not be able to against like Ohio State, right? Like, I think there's upside here because of what we saw in 2023, but I just don't think I can draft him currently. He's a guy that maybe I'll throw on like a watch list, but yeah. I don't think he's a bad player.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to some running backs here, Mox. This might be kind of interesting because this is where we have seen some success in the transfer department the last couple of years. I mean, Desmond Reed, obviously the biggest name that has come out of the FCS and quickly translating not only to the FBS, but to the Power 4 level he did. So we'll see if we have our next Desmond Reed with some of these guys here. Our first two here, Scott Trey. Is that how you pronounce his name? Scott Trey Humphrey? Scott Trey Humphrey. So Scott Trey Humphrey, the running back out of Montana State, he's headed over to New Mexico. We also got Elijah Tolliver, the running back out of Sacramento State, headed over to Michigan State. And then we got a trio of running backs following their head coach from South Dakota State. Dadgummit, Jared, come on.
A different SDSU.
Going to Wazoo. We'll get to them in a moment. But we'll start with Scott Trey Humphrey here. This is going to be an interesting one, right? He's coming off a fantastic year from Montana State. If you take his 13 games, extrapolate them to 12 games, you got a 1,200-yard rusher, 13 touchdowns. I think he can replicate that in the Mountain West decently easily. That was good for about 200 fantasy points, puts him at RB34. Big downside, though. This man, I don't think has ever seen, I know he has, but last year he had one target. They do not, like his previous coaching staff did not use him in the passing game whatsoever. Maybe that system, I tend to doubt it. When you have that little targets, that means they do not trust you to catch the ball. And so that's definitely a downside, but doesn't maybe really need it. Let's take a look at Jason X RB1s the last couple of years, right? 2024, Nate Thomas, 8 games, 100 attempts, 540 yards, 5 touchdowns. Not great. But then you go back to Anthony Woods in 2023. Anthony Woods in 12 games, 207 attempts, 1,100 yards, 16 touchdowns. I'll take that any day. Then you go back to 2022. Anthony Woods, 12 games, 151 attempts, 875 yards, 3 touchdowns. Roschon Johnson, different Roschon Johnson, the one you're thinking of, he had like 12 touchdowns. So that was some weird split they had going on there. So that's all to say that Jason X RB1s have been very inconsistent the last couple of years. So it's going to be very difficult, in my opinion, to really plug a guy in compared to some of these other systems we might be looking at here. And then, Mox, you threw on the show sheet here about Idaho bringing on Deshaun Buchanan, a running back that was at Idaho, now transferring with the coaching staff here. How are you navigating this situation? Because I think there's room for there to be a good running back here potentially. But who knows?
Yeah, I mean, I think Humphrey is by far the best rusher in this room. They brought a couple more backs in too. Like those are just to me the top two. They needed to add depth to this room. I don't think any of the other ones are factors. By far the best rusher for sure. Like the dude can run between the tackles with the best of them. He is a FBS running level running back. Now the offense that he had was really, really good at running, and they run some of that creative option stuff. So like, I think that helped him quite a bit, but I still think he's good. Like I said, 0 in the passing game, not going to catch any passes. I just wonder how much Deshaun Buchanan rotates in, because he was a true freshman last year at Idaho.
Yep.
And true freshmen in the G5 level don't get a lot of run. Like usually they redshirt their freshman year. Mm-hmm. It's even like more so at the FCS level, right? Because like those dudes are getting poached immediately if you show anything good.
Yep.
He got quite a bit of experience last year with Idaho. That tells me that this is a guy that they probably want to feature in some capacity. Yep. Good receiver. I think that he is certainly better than Humphrey. But like anytime a running back has an average depth of target greater than 0, that tells me that they're being deployed in some more downfield roles. 3 is pretty good for a true freshman. He had only 9 targets. I get it. He only played in like the latter half of the season, and he played a lot more in the playoffs due to injuries and stuff. But like, I don't know. Like, I want to really like Humphrey because I think he's really good, but Buchanan just worries me about what his role is going to be. Then the whole offense is going to, I think, need to pass more than they're going to be able to run. It's like, it's one thing when you have a legit rusher at quarterback like they had in Dampier last year. That's not Jack Lane.
Yeah.
So is that even going to be able to open up stuff we saw with Eli Sanders? I don't think so. Like, I think the rushing game from New Mexico's take a huge hit, and Humphrey might just be like the guy who gets you like 800 yards and 6 touchdowns. Like that's fine, but that's just not a fantasy relevant or like a big fantasy contributor.
Yeah, I would agree. Again, a lot of things kind of going against Humphrey here, which is unfortunate because, again, he was awesome at Montana State. I felt like he could have found a better landing spot than this.
He's a really good player. That's what sucks about it, because I just think it like there's a lot of factors that work against him.
What about Elijah Tao Oliver here, the running back going from Sacramento State to Michigan State here? Coming off a big year for Sacramento State, 924 yards, 7 touchdowns, a ton of receptions here, 38 receptions, 317 yards, 2 touchdowns here. Normally be salivating over this, right? Him going to Michigan State here. We love Jonathan Smith, RB1s, but last year was kind of a big split from what we normally get with Smith's RB1s, right? Very true split with Kayron Lynch-Adams and then Nate Carter, like almost a 50-50 split between the two of them, right? Kayron Lynch-Adams, he's got another year of eligibility. He's coming back this year. So it's like, do we think that they're bringing in ETT here to be the guy that kind of takes over everything, or are we going to get another split here? What do you think, Mox?
This is a really interesting player fit because Michigan State certainly needed a running back. And I think Tolliver is a good player. I don't know if he's really a plus receiver. And that's where a lot of his upside, I think, comes from when we're having these conversations. He was targeted there, but that has been a role like that Sacramento State uses their backs in a lot. Like they throw a lot of passes to the running back. I mean, you can even go back to like Cam Scadaboo time. Like he was catching a ton of stuff there. Like, and he's a fine receiver too. Like he's a good receiver, Scadaboo. But like they do this with almost every back they have on the roster. So is this a player who's a legit receiving back, or is he just a guy who can like catch passes? That to me determines a lot of what his value boils down to. It's like I talked earlier, anything above a 0 A dot is like you're getting deployed a little bit downfield. You could probably catch. Like you have some talent there, right? Negative 1.3. Most of his stuff is like the dub off out of the backfield. 11 of his 38 receptions came in a single game. Is the receiving upside as like sexy as it is my concern, because I don't know that the Michigan State running back is like a really productive role given how the offense has been trending. I actually think the offense is going to be better this year, so maybe that elevates the ceiling. I don't know. He's maybe a player that I'll draft in drafts because I don't think people are going to be super wise to him. I'm skeptical about how well he translates.
I'm skeptical as well. And personally, I'd rather take the shot on Kayron Lynch-Adams, because Kayron Lynch-Adams, like we saw the flashes last year, right? Like he's got the speed. He has the breakaway ability that, like you said, if the offensive line gets better, if Aiden Childs' play elevates, that'll open up more holes for a guy like Kayron Lynch-Adams to potentially hit a long one. Hopefully the receivers get better. With Nick Marsh, they bring in, Amari Kelly, they bring in Creshawn McCray. I'm not saying any of these guys are going to be superstars or anything, but it'll be better than what they had last year.
For sure. Good unit.
So
the other concern that I have with him is like, this was the first year he had over 200 carries.
Yep.
He's been in school for 5 years. Like, this will be his 5th year. He only averaged 5.1 yards per carry at the FCS level. Like, how well do you think that's translating? Because when we're talking like Scotty Humphrey, we're talking Deshaun Buchanan. Like, those guys were averaging like 6-7 yards a carry.
Oh no,
that concerns me.
They were getting up to 8 yards a carry, if I remember correctly. Like, it was insane.
Yeah, like that inefficient, and not that Sac State was like an awesome team last year. They certainly weren't, but like that concerns me.
All right. What about this trio here at the end, going from South Dakota State over to Wazoo? They are following their head coach there. Like, he is, this coach, Jimmy Rogers, couldn't get his quarterback to follow him, couldn't get his wide receiver to follow him, but boy, oh boy, does he have some loyalty among these running backs, because he brought the whole room with him. Between Kirby Voorhees, Angel Johnson, Maxwell Woods, all three follow him. And why am I spending so much time on this room? Why am I thinking about this room so much? Let's take a look at Jimmy Rogers' RB1 over the last 2 years as the head coach for South Dakota State. 2024, Amar Johnson, 14 games, 177 rushing yards, 177 attempts for 1,159 rushing yards and 13 touchdowns, 43 targets for 27 receptions, 203 yards, and a touchdown. And in 2023, Isaiah Davis, 13 games, 205 attempts, 1,384 yards, 15 touchdowns, along with 29 targets, 22 receptions for 196 yards and a touchdown. There is a big shot that whoever gets the RB1 job here is a very, very fantasy relevant back for 2025, right? My question, though, is who gets the nod out of these three, right? Our first candidate here, Angel Johnson, redshirt senior, RB2 last year, 92 attempts, 650 yards, 7.1 yards per carry, 3 touchdowns, 17 targets, a touchdown. You also got Kirby Voorhees, a younger guy, redshirt sophomore, RB3 for the team last year, 580 yards, 8 touchdowns, so very much a guy more involved along the goal line than Angel Johnson was, right? And then last but not least, we got Maxwell Woods, a true freshman last year, going to be a true sophomore this year. He was the RB5 for the team last year, but he had 28 attempts, 175 yards, 6.3 yards per attempt, a touchdown, and a little receiving work in there. All three of these guys have something, they bring something to the table, right? Angel Johnson, he's got the experience. He's been in the system the longest, right? Voorhees, clearly the guy they want to hammer at the goal line based on what we've seen here. Then you got Maxwell Woods, the only guy out of these three who had his red shirt burned. So clearly he is stepping up early in a way that the staff is taking note of. And I think he's on a faster trajectory upwards than either of these other two guys, potentially. I just don't know really which guy to expect to get the number one job. And in fact, I'm kind of to the point where I think they're also relatively even in a way that there's probably going to be a bigger split than we've seen in the past. At least that's what the experience level is telling me here. But this is also a squad that ran the ball 38 times per game last year, right? That's enough to feature for a bell cow plus, giving some room for, RB2 and RB3 plus Ackhouse getting some run here. So it's a big, long rant to say, I don't know, but I'm keeping my eye on these spring reports to figure out who's going to get the bell cow role here, if there is going to be a guy. What do you think, Mox?
Yeah, I tend to believe that there is not anyone that's going to separate and have 1,000 yards. That would be my guess. I just think they like what each back brings a little bit differently. The one that I don't think it will be is Maxwell Woods, because he's 185 pounds.
Okay, yeah, probably not him.
He's a very specific role in the offense. Really good player, just like they're not going to give him 150, 200 carries. Neither Voorhees or Johnson do a ton of receiving work. I mean, Johnson does more than Voorhees does for sure. Mm-hmm. Voorhees has 8 targets last year and 1 reception. Like, what's up? What's up with that dude?
Yeah.
And that's all he's had in his 2-year career. But Voorhees is bigger than Johnson is. He's got the goal line work, and he was more efficient. So, I think Voorhees is, if I'm targeting somebody, he's the guy that I want to target. Mm-hmm. I'm just a little afraid it's just not going to matter at all. Again, I think there's going to be a rotation.
I think that this is a squad that even if I am scared of a split, I'm willing to take shots on these guys late in drafts as long as that's where they stay, right? As long as we're talking like round, 15, 20 plus for these guys, like I think I'll be okay. Even 15, like round 15 might be getting too high for me. But I think there is value to be found here.
Do we think that they even get drafted?
I think so.
'Cause
Again, knowing the
yeah.
CFF community, the fact that we're even talking about it right now means they've already been bumped up into the round 25, 30 range.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I guess the guy I would target is Voorhees if I had to pick one, just because I think he's the best. He's got the most touchdown upside. I think he and Johnson are both really good rushers. Yeah. So I mean, I don't know. That's where I would go, and I probably draft one too. Because what if one of them gets hurt?
I was about to say
Woods is not stepping into a full-time role.
I was about to bring out a Nate Marquise ism here, which is the nuclear option, right? Like if one of these guys goes down, the other one has upside of 1,400 yards and 20 touchdowns.
I don't know about that.
Well, I mean, shoot, Isaiah Davis got
it is an offensive
Isaiah Davis got 1,300 yards just a couple seasons ago.
Isaiah Davis is way better than any of these backs, though. At least in my opinion.
But you never know. You never know, right? Like
that's
again,
true. You never know.
You never know. But like again, if one of these backs gets 200 plus carries, right? Like given how efficient this offensive system has been over the last couple of years, there could be a nuclear option here. So that's why I think this backfield is so interesting. Let's move on. Let's keep rolling with a couple more of these running backs. We got 3 running back rooms we need to talk about here. One, Malachi Hosley, going from UPenn to Georgia Tech, adding to that backfield, which already has Jamal Haynes. We got Kenji Christian, the running back out of North Carolina A&T, going to Toledo. Is that going to impact potentially Chip Trayanum there? And then last but not least, we got 2 running backs headed to a offensive system that we know for a fact we want to try to figure out who the running back 1 is there. Are they going to be able to overtake the likes of Jaheim White? We'll discuss that with Ty Edwards and LJ Turner headed there. But Mox, we'll start real quick with Malachi Hosley going to Georgia Tech. I'm personally not too excited about this. Obviously, he looked really good for Penn in 2023. But again, him going into that room with Jamal Haynes, not that Haynes was fantastic last year. He's RB68. I just have a hard time seeing him overcome Haynes for that RB1 role. Maybe, again, Hosley has several years of eligibility left. This might be more of a dynasty play than an actual this year play. What do you think?
Yeah. So the big reason that I think he's worth talking about today is because how much I think he's going to hurt Haynes. Like this is a player who can play, I think, at the ACC level. Again, another example of a player who came and was an impact player as a true freshman. Now it's a little bit different in the Ivy League with like academic stuff, like you graduate and then you move on. But he has a verified 4.5. So like he got a little juice to him. 20 plus catches as a true freshman. Like this is a player who I think is a really quality RB2. Mm-hmm. And I think he's going to come in for Haynes a good amount. And that really scares me about projecting Haynes to like take a bigger workload in 2025. Like that's really the concern that I have. And I think either back could be really good if one goes down. But I think he's going to step in and play more than people want him to play. That's where I want to push the pause button on Haynes more than I want to like pump up Hosley, who I think is a good player. It's just I'm not sure either is going to return fantasy value.
I forget if Haynes missed a lot of time last year, but to me, like if we were going to see Haynes get that workload, right, like be that true RB1 workhorse back, like I feel like last year was going to be it.
They just don't use him that way. They just don't. They've it's pretty clear to me watching Georgia Tech that they want to rotate him out and keep him like pretty fresh because he's an explosive player. But like you give him 25 touches and that gets diminished. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Now they have a who I think is a really good RB2 there. Maybe Haynes is going to see like 12 to 15 touches a game. And that's kind of where his ceiling is. And that ceiling just isn't going to pay off if you're drafting him in the top like 4 rounds of a college fantasy draft, in my opinion.
What about Kenji Christian here again? running back at North Carolina A&T, headed to Toledo. Obviously, a lot of people excited about Chip Trayanum going there, but is this somebody that we potentially need to worry about here? If you look at his 2023 stats, obviously, or not obviously, but Christian was hurt all of 2024. Basically, he only played 3 games. In 2023, 135 attempts, 729 yards, 6 touchdowns, 14 receptions, 170 yards, and a touchdown there. Personally, I'm not seeing somebody that I'm looking at here going to Toledo and saying like, oh, this is clearly Toledo's like next potential bell cow back. I mean, he wasn't really even a bell cow back at the FCS level. He's been hurt for a whole year. I don't really know what I'm getting back here with him going to Toledo. And this isn't even me trying to pump up Chip Trayanum because I'm a little skeptical of Trayanum even going to Toledo. Like, I think we're buying a little bit too much into that too early on here. Granted, his value wasn't super crazy in the way too early draft, but he was drafted in the top 9 rounds there. So, Mox, what do you think about Christian? Anything? What do you, or I guess how are you reading this Toledo backfield?
Yeah, this is another guy that's on the list because I think people are talking about him, wondering how much he's going to impact Trayanum. I'm not sure I buy it all that much. Virginia Tech to North Carolina A&T transfer. We saw, I think, some really nice flashes. They played Wake Forest week 1, and he had like an awesome game. And you're like, okay, well, maybe this dude can like really translate to the MAC level. And that's kind of what I'm thinking in the back of my head is like, hey, like I like Trayanum a lot, and I'll probably draft him. But Christian's a guy who has size too. Like he's at least 210, 215. Big back, can also catch passes. Like this is not an insignificant add to the Toledo room, I think. Not crazy efficient in 2023, but had 2 really good games before he got hurt. What is the reality of Christian? Can he be an impact player? Yep. Is it going to be... Basically, I'm trying to straddle the line of, is Trip Trayanum Penny Boone, or is he like 70% of Penny Boone and like 30% is this Christian usage and stuff? And so like,
I mean, 70%.
He's not an insignificant ad.
70% of Penny Boone doesn't sound too terrible. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but
it doesn't. It's just like, this is a name to monitor in the room because like, it's not like there's nobody there.
Gotcha.
I think Christian could do stuff, like do running back stuff.
Speaking of guys to monitor and rooms to monitor, again, West Virginia, that Rich Rod system is obviously one that we as a CFF community have come to love. He loves featuring one main back. And even just recently in 2024, we got Trey Stewart. He finished his RB9 on the year. He probably would have finished even higher if he had gotten that role earlier in the year. We got 2 running backs here headed to West Virginia. Obviously, Jaheim White is still hanging around at West Virginia. He got drafted pretty highly in the way too early draft, but obviously we are adding a couple more backs here. Ty Edwards being one of them, the former Northern Illinois running back. And before that, blast from the past, he was at UTSA, a guy that I hyped up as the next great UTSA running back, and then he proceeded to do nothing. That's egg on my face. We also have LJ Turner, a running back from Catawba, I think that's how you pronounce that college. Division II, headed up to West Virginia. He's making a big jump here, obviously, but when you look at his stats last year, you kind of see why Turner is making such a big jump, because clearly he was way too good for Division II football. Turner in 8 games last year on 174 attempts at 1,224 yards and 13 touchdowns. You're talking about well over 8 yards a carry. This man was an absolute... If you were playing Division II fantasy last year, God bless you if you had Turner on your team. I doubt anybody actually does that. You know what? I can see Mox playing in his own Division II league by himself.
I do. I'm not that depraved.
But regardless, Turner obviously, if you extrapolate that to 12 games, Turner was on fire for a monster year, right? At the Division II level. Does that translate at all to West Virginia? He is, if I remember correctly, he's a bigger guy too. Like obviously, Edwards is like, I already saw our friend Volume Pigs already kind of compare him to like a, oh my God, what am I blanking? Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry. A big boy. He's a big boy. I can't remember what LJ Turner's size was. I'll have to look that up. But while I'm doing that, Mox, why don't you give us your thoughts on this backfield? Can either one of these guys take over here? Is this a scenario where we're overthinking this and just draft Jaheim White? What are you thinking?
So I brought this one up because I saw just Volume Pig's article and I was like, or you brought this to me and you said, hey, we should add Ty Edwards. I assume in reaction to the article, and it
Yes.
was a really good piece, and I thought it made a pretty compelling case. And then I said, okay, well, we're adding D2 transfers now, and so you've opened a different can of worms. If I had to pick a guy behind Jaheim White, which I think is a really valuable position because of how much Rich Rod runs that RB1, right? If White goes down, like one of these guys could be a league winner. I think it's Turner. I've been reading some West Virginia stuff that have him above Edwards on the depth chart. And that doesn't really shock me because Edwards had a pretty monster season last year, like over 1,000 yards. Break it down a little bit. 229 of those yards came against Indiana State. Not great. Really efficient performance. That's probably his best game of the year, statistically wise and like competition wise. 174 against Valpo. Like Valparaiso's terrible. They're like one of the worst teams in the FCS. And then St. Thomas, who I don't even know who this team is. This must be a D2 team. 136 yards. In 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 other games, he didn't have more than 62 yards in any of them. So like he's beating up on like little sisters of the poor. The dude's 6'4", 230, like an above average athlete is going to just destroy these D2 kids who are like, the Pioneer League is non-scholarship. Like he's beating up on non-scholarship kids. Like that's the, like, I just don't know that he's going to translate. Like, cause when he played teams that were decent, they got Nebraska 10 for 37. They got Hawaii 8 for 13. Like I know that UNI is like, can't block some of these dudes, right? I get it, especially Nebraska. I'm just really concerned about some of those inefficient performances. Mm-hmm. Like that's under 62 yards in 8 of your 13 games. Like that's scary.
I would agree. I'd rather take the upside here, and I did look it up. LJ Turner, again, at least on 247, he's listed as 5'9", 195. So you're not, talking about a guy that's already built for workhorse load there, right? But he's not like a tiny dude either.
Almost 200 pounds. That'll fly.
Yeah, but he's a little short, 5'9", but
yeah. I'll live. I just think the upside with Turner is much higher than Edwards is. I just really worry that Edwards isn't going to be able to translate.
We just do we have any games of LJ Turner like against like higher level competition?
I would have to find like a Catawba game logs. Yeah. To be honest, I did not watch a lot of D2 football last year. I'll be honest. I don't know that I have.
You weren't sat down for every Catawba game.
Mox, no, how dare you? That's got to be in my area. Actually, I bet Catawba's in like Western North Carolina. But I bet I could probably head out there and it could cost some LJ Turner. But yeah, the combination depth chart I've seen from West Virginia tells me that I want to be preferring Turner, I think, over Edwards.
All righty.
At least that's my 2 cents. And he was another player who came in as a true freshman and did stuff. Like I always think that's interesting when you're talking about lower levels of football.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's move on to some wide receivers here, Mox. And I think this might be some of the more interesting topics. We got 4 wide receivers here that we're going to be discussing. And the first one here, in my opinion, is the most exciting. That's Jordan Dwyer. Wide receiver out of Idaho going over to TCU. This past year in 14 games, 135 targets, 79 receptions, 1,204 yards, and 12 touchdowns. If you shorten that down to 12 games, you got 116 targets, 68 receptions, 1,000 yards, 10 touchdowns. That puts you at roughly 197 fantasy points, which would have been good for wide receiver 15 last year. Again, I'm not saying that's translating to TCU, right? But it does tell me that, one, he is good in a primary role, right? He can handle being the wide receiver 1 for a team. 2, TCU just got done producing Jack Beck at wide receiver 21 and Savion Williams at wide receiver 14. So I'm throwing cold water on the idea that Dwyer could be wide receiver 15, but I'm not saying he can't reach there given what we just saw with Jack Beck and Savion Williams, right? I mentioned this before when we talked about Pimpton going to TCU, but between Beck, Williams, and Richardson, there's a 243 regular season targets vacated here for TCU. We expect Eric McAllister to step up in a big way, and I would say he's still the number one guy that you probably draft in your leagues for this offense. But this is a team that's going to throw 35 plus times a game, and they don't have a lot coming back at wide receiver. They clearly were going and targeting big time fish in the portal. And the fact they were able to land Dwyer over the likes of Georgia and USC tells me that they have promised this dude some production in 2025. I think that he's absolutely going to be the number 2 guy outside of McAllister. Do I think we are looking at, another Beck-Williams situation where they're both finishing in the top 25 wide receivers? I think it's a little early to say that, but I think that doesn't mean that Dwyer can't finish in the top 40, even as the number 2 in this offense. Again, they're just going to have so much volume. They're gonna be behind so much. I don't see how this isn't a good fit for Dwyer moving forward. Is there anything else you got to add, Mox?
He's a really interesting player because he's not going to do anything after the catch. He's basically he's 20 yards downfield, chuck it to him. That's the type of player he is. I think it's a valuable player, but it's really different than what Savion Williams' role was, right? So I would not expect him to step into that type of role. I do think Dwyer is at least the wide receiver 2 here, though. We saw him produce against basically anybody on Idaho's schedule. And yeah, I think Idaho's offense is pretty good in general. But I think Dwyer's got a little juice to him as a player. So I don't know that the crazy ceiling is here, but given how much the offense passes, what they want to do, the fact that they need a guy on the outside, I think you're going to get some weeks where he's productive. Probably a little bit sexier in a best ball format, but I think he's a really solid player. And it's not an accident that top teams were after him. I do think TCU is a good fit for his skill set and his the level of play that I think he can achieve. I just don't know that he could be the one there. Maybe he can, but
I don't think he needs to be the one to be productive for CFF. Is kind of my point, right? Again, between Beck and Williams, you got 2 top 25 wide receivers there. Like I said, I'm not expecting that again, right? I would think that they would spread the ball out just a little bit more. That's kind of a perfect storm that brewed last year with TCU, but I don't know, man. I'm probably, depending on where he goes in drafts, I'm probably going to have a lot of Dwyer. I think he's a guy that I'm going to be very comfortable drafting round 15 plus. It's just an upside wide receiver. Because like you said, if McAllister goes down.
I think he's got a ton. Yeah. I think he's got a ton of upside for sure. And he's really efficient too. More than 3 yards per route run. That tells me he is certainly, he can certainly do damage in limited reps if they do rotate at receiver or something. I don't know. I think he's a really good player. I just, he was basically Idaho's entire passing off, receiving offense. He had 135 targets last year. He was pretty crazy. It was pretty crazy.
What about Giovanni Gibson here, the wide receiver out of Arkansas Pine Bluff, which, by the way, I found out today has one of the coolest logos in all of sports. Congratulations!
I can't believe y'all didn't know about this,
dude.
Awesome.
That is an awesome logo. And then I found out that the UAPB is in the main. That is a graphic designer's dream come true. God, that
oh yeah,
dude, love that logo so much.
If you're listening, hey, this is an audio medium, and we had the logo on the screen. But if you're listening
even the
on
people
a podcast,
watching on YouTube,
go look up the logo. Go look up the logo.
Yeah, even if you're watching on YouTube, you need binoculars to see the logo right now. Just look up the full version of it. It's an awesome logo. Anyway, enough of that. Let's talk about Gibson. 12 games last year, 108 targets, 78 receptions, 1,200 yards, 9 touchdowns. 209 fantasy points. That wide receiver 11 on the year. If you put it in FBS, that's pretty much your dream wide receiver stat line, right? That you can expect year to year. That's going to get you top 10, top 12 wide receiver every single year, right? He's going to Oklahoma. There's a lot of blame thrown around for Oklahoma's disappointing year last year, but I think one clear issue that everybody kind of agrees on was the wide receiver room. Whether they just weren't healthy and that entire second tier of guys just flat out sucked. Oklahoma had to do something about wide receivers, and it doesn't help that they lose both Farouk and Nick Anderson to the portal. They do get Burks back, who as of this moment, he's looking like he's going to be at worst a top 10, if not top 5 wide receiver for CFF in most drafts this year. There's going to be room for another here, though. Like, we've seen Ben Arbuckle's system do well enough to give multiple options at wide receiver at times. I mean, shoot, go back to, 2021 Western Kentucky, where both Jarrett Stearns and Mitchell Tinsley were just absolute dynamite, right? Of the options that Oklahoma has brought in through the portal, which admittedly I don't love a lot of them, I do think Gibson is the most promising. He plays on the outside, which gives us some room for him to potentially be that secondary option, Burks being the primary guy in the slot. We can get a top guy on the outside here with Gibson. What do you think, Mox? Do you think that this offense would be good enough to potentially get him that, or what do you think?
So I like the player a lot, and I've talked about him quite a few times on a couple different shows this offseason. Big X receiver, athletic, was recruited as a tight end to Arkansas Monticello, and basically didn't do anything there. He's like a really late bloomer to the position. So I don't think he's super technical. I don't think he's super refined, but I do think he can use his body and athleticism to win. The SWAC to the SEC is probably the biggest jump you can make in terms of FCS to FBS. Arkansas Pine Bluff is terrible. They're like a bottom 5 FCS team. But 46% of receiving yardage market share there. He dominated his competition and he dominated the room. Very clear this dude was playing way, way below his level. There's not another weapon on this offense that I like outside of Burks.
Yeah.
So if you're going to tell me that we have the outside receiver at Oklahoma on an offense that we think is going to pass a bunch, that's a player that I'm going to be targeting in drafts. I just think his athleticism is just that much of a difference maker. And yeah, like I said, the technical parts of this game I think can improve a lot. That's a big concern. I just like what I see on tape. I do. I just see he gets open all the time. It's just like he's just like bigger and faster than people. That's all it is. And it's going to be minimized in the SEC, but I don't expect him to have 1,500 yards. I expect it to be like a contributor.
Yeah, I definitely agree 100%. Again, Oklahoma desperately needed wide receivers who could separate, and that in of itself will make them much better than they were last year. And even just by default, right? This offense, again, there's just nothing really returning outside of Burks. Even if you look at that second tier of guys like J.J. Hester, think guys like, Jacquez Petaway, guys like Brennan Thompson, they're all gone. They all transferred out. They understood that they were the scapegoats for that offense last year. They were like, all right, I'm out. I'll take my shot elsewhere. You guys clearly don't want us around anymore. Oklahoma goes and grabs a bunch of these guys. I think just by default, Gibson becomes interesting because there's just literally nobody else in this room. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, you don't have to take him high in drafts, right?
No.
You really don't. That's not a player that's going to cost you.
Please don't actually. Not only just don't.
I don't know if we talked about a player outside of McIver that I would be taking in the top 15 rounds of drafts today. That just to keep it in a little bit of perspective. Maybe Dwyer.
Dwyer, I'd consider, but yeah, other than that, Proctor, I keep down there. Yeah, I would agree.
That's just like a PSA.
Yeah. I probably should just insert that at the very beginning of the show and just be like, hey, just by the way, nobody we're talking about here today will be drafting top 15 rounds. Got two more wide receivers we want to talk about here. One guy I know you're pretty excited about, Cooper Barkate, the wide receiver coming from Harvard to Duke. And we also got Matthew Henry, wide receiver, going from Western Illinois to Western Kentucky. Always interesting to see guys show up at Western Kentucky. They seem to like to feature transfer wide receivers there. But we'll start with Barkate here. He had 10 games last year, 95 targets, 63 receptions, 1,084 yards, and 11 touchdowns in the Ivy League there. You extrapolate that to 12 games. You talk about 114 targets, 76 receptions, 1,300 yards, 13 touchdowns. Gets you 246.1 fantasy points. That would have been good for wide receiver 4 last year. Obviously, I do not expect him to do that this year. But, as we've mentioned before on previous shows, and as Mox has been reminded of over and over again, Duke threw a crap ton last year, right? 400 times last year, and that was by choice. It was not because they were behind or anything like that. But this is an offense that, as much as they threw, they are losing a lot. They lose Jordan Moore. They lose Eli Painkel. Those two vacate 171 targets combined. Both of those guys on the outside. Duke also brings in Andrell Anthony, but let's be real. When has Andrell Anthony done anything consistently at the FBS level, right? It seems like maybe I go with him by default, but I'm not going to lie. Given what I've seen out of Barcade coming out of the Ivy League, like, he also plays on the outside. I think there's a greater than 50% chance that he ends up being the wide receiver 1 for Duke, unless there's somebody already on that depth chart that comes out of nowhere. I guess I will say, like, I think there's a greater percent chance that Barcade is the wide receiver 1. I would say there's a greater than 50% chance that he is the most interesting guy to me on this passing attack right now. I'm just a little concerned about jumping from Ivy League, to ACC. What do you think, Mox?
Oh, you don't like Shamar Higgins and Quayshawn Brown? Not big fans of them.
I mean, considering they're both slot guys, I'm not really going for that.
Who else is going to catch passes for Duke? That's the question I keep coming back to. Like, they don't have a lot of returning production, really any significant returning production at receiver. Barcade is at least the most experienced guy. Like, he started at Harvard. He started like half of last season. He's a guy who's been productive. And yeah, so like, if I was to compare where Harvard was, they're like a middle of the pack CUSA team. Mm-hmm. That's kind of the level that he's coming from. Maybe a little bit worse, but I don't know. Like, I think he's a pretty decent player. Like, I don't think he's anything special, but like, I don't think the ACC is a level too high for him. Now, can he be wide receiver 1 in an offense in the ACC? That's a different question. But if they're going to throw 400 times again, it has to go somewhere. And I feel like Barcade is the guy that I want to target. And yeah, Andrell Anthony can't stay healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I think he's a better player than Barcade is if he's healthy? Yeah, probably. I think so. We haven't seen it consistently though in a long time now.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, he's a guy that I think is worth drafting.
What about Matthew Henry here, wide receiver out of Western Illinois, going to Western Kentucky? Didn't really start playing full time for Western Illinois until about week 3 last year. In the 10 full games that he got, though, 95 targets, 62 receptions, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. You extrapolate that to 12 games, again, 114 targets, 74 receptions, 1,386 yards, 7 touchdowns. Would have been a top 10 wide receiver if you just plopped him in the FBS rankings there. To me, I think this one is a bit more promising than Barcade, simply because that jump from FCS to CUSA is a much smaller jump. In fact, you said that the Ivy League is pretty much the same as CUSA. How does Western Illinois' conference compare?
I would have to look at my numbers.
I will let you look at that as I continue to ramble on here. I was kind of skeptical at first about there being room in this room for Henry, because I was kind of under the impression that Western Kentucky's kind of returning a lot here. But upon further inspection, they kind of lose more than I thought they did. They lose Devlin Smith to eligibility. They lose Michael Matheson to eligibility. Coy Moore is in the transfer portal. You got Keyshawn Johnson coming back. That's obviously going to be a pretty big impact in terms of, Henry being able to take over the 1 spot. I think Keyshawn Johnson is still pretty clearly the 1 for the Hilltoppers here. But my problem is that as much as I like then that Henry can potentially take over that other outside position, you look at Rick Bowie's system, it usually features 1 outside guy and 1 slot guy. Now, if I get news that one of Henry or Johnson is moving to the slot, then I'm going to love both of these guys. Right? Mox, your thoughts on Matthew Henry? Do you think he's a producer for CFF in 2025?
So what I like about Henry, and there's a couple players like this on this list. Giovanni Gibson was one too. That spent a single year at the FCS level. D2 transfer or true freshman. Like, that's pretty interesting to me. Like, okay, I proved it at the D2 level. Okay, now I proved it at the FCS level. Now I can go to FBS, and like only spending a year there is like pretty impressive stuff. So I wonder what the ceiling is for Henry, because he was pretty good basically every year that we've seen him play football. And this tells me that there's something here for Western Kentucky. I project him to start on the outside. And Keyshawn Johnson and him are the starters. I think Cody Epps is the one who gets the slot work, who I didn't even see transferred from BYU in. As long as he stays healthy, right? They also had a Jarius Mack. But like I think Henry's upside is way higher than like going in. It almost always is. I think Henry's that guy. I really do, and I think it's really interesting to see the jump like that. Those are players that I am paying a little bit more attention to in terms of how quickly they're moving up, because it just tells me that they're better than the league that they're in. But we were comparing the Ivy League. They're about the same conference. So they're separated by like 2 or 3 points on average.
So you're talking about this just not being a very big jump from Western Illinois Conference to the CUSA.
Not real. I mean, relatively speaking, not really. I mean, there's like a 7 to 10 point difference. But like,
considering that Henry's clearly already playing above his level, like.
Yeah, like he's a player that I think could adapt way quicker than maybe like a Harvard Duke transfer, right? Maybe academically he'll be fine.
Yeah,
maybe not as much on the football field. And I like Cooper Breckett, right? But like Henry is a player that I think is going to have an easier time, and I think he lines up outside.
All right, Mox, we got 3 tight ends on the list here. I'm just going to have you go through all of them because I don't really have much thoughts on either of these guys, except for 2 of them are replacing top 12 tight ends from last year, assumedly. But Camden Overton, tight end out of Gardner-Webb, he's headed to Georgia State. That's your assumed Dorian Fleming replacement. You got Brock Chappelle, tight end out of Furman, going to Louisiana, assumedly potentially replacing Terrence Carter there. And then you also had Zach Atkins, the tight end out of Northwest Missouri State, Division II guy, going to Colorado. And then I know you also got some other guy. You got another guy here that we couldn't make it onto the graphic, but I know you want to talk about. I'll let you talk about him. Jacob Peterson, the tight end of Holy Cross, going to Toledo, assumingly replacing Anthony Torres there. So a bunch of guys here, maybe replacing some big time tight ends from last year. What do you like about these guys?
So I'll go in order, and I'll go kind of quickly because who wants to talk about FCS tight ends for a long time? Besides me.
I say you do. That's it.
Besides me. Overton was a pretty big contributor for Gardner-Webb last year, and it was his 3rd season, but he really came on strong. Like, he had at least 5 targets his last 6 games, and he was really productive with those targets. Good after the catch from what I've seen. The numbers back it up. 5.6 yak per reception for a tight end is like pretty decent. I think there's a player here that's good. The reason that he made the list, though, is because he's replacing Dorian Fleming, and that's an offense that has kind of shown us they want to use the tight end a little bit. Mm-hmm. So if they're going to use the tight end, I don't think Overton's a bad guy to slide into that role. He was a big piece of that passing offense for Gardner-Webb last year, and it's not the biggest step up in the world, right? Mm-hmm. So he's a name that I'm just like watching because of past production. If he had gone somewhere else, maybe not, right? That's why he makes the list. Atkins is a player that I've never seen play football. Never got eyes on him outside of highlights, right? He was contacted by 20 plus FBS schools coming from D2 where he didn't have a lot of production.
Oof.
And so I dug into this a little bit. The dude's just a crazy athlete. Like, the upside there is tremendous. Is essentially why he's getting recruited. Like, he's a really high-end athlete and has size. I don't know what to expect from him, though. But with all those offers, something tells me that there is possibly something there for tight end. So I'm not drafting him, right? I just don't think he's draftable.
Yeah. But
I do think he's worth listening to what is coming out of Colorado in fall or spring and seeing if he earns a spot on the depth chart, like where he slotted in, because he's really highly sought after. I think he's just a name to watch. Like, how often do you see a D2 tight end move up to the FBS that has like no production?
Yeah.
Like, to me, that tells me that he's an interesting enough player.
It helps that he's going to a room, right, where there's tons of vacated production, right? So if he is what they think he is, he could easily slot into one of those top roles.
Yeah, I think we'll see. It's a big jump and it's a big ask. And you're not drafting him, right? This is just a player like, hey, if he starts popping up in reports, you heard it on Chasing the Natty back in February that this was a guy that was highly sought after, highly athletic, etc. Right?
I already have the clip saved.
And what we're trying to, there we go. We're trying to inform those type of decisions. And then the final guy is Brock Chappell. Interesting player. Not sure what the upside is. He only played 2 years at Furman. He was pretty good. I mean, he wasn't super productive either, but this is another player who's athletic and like has size. And he's also replacing a really productive tight end in Terrence Carter at Louisiana Monroe. Or just Louisiana. Sorry, I'm going to get in trouble. I like the fit. I can't tell you that the guy is Carter because he's not. Like Terrence Carter is just a really good player. But I do think it's an offensive one that wants to utilize the tight end. And even if we get like a chunk of what we got from Carter last year with Chappell, like I don't think it's a bad like guy. Again, another watch list player of all the tight end really needs to do is like be kind of athletic and get on the field.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it doesn't take more than that.
Yeah, for sure. All righty. Sorry, I did not have the energy to fully give full thoughts on a lot of these tight ends.
Oh wait, I get to name my my guy who didn't make the graphic, and that's Jacob Peterson.
Oh yes, you're right.
Really productive last year, like 500 yards for a tight end at the FCS levels. Honestly, really impressive, and it's the role that he had that really has me intrigued. He's a guy who's 6'4", 250, 255. His ADOT was 13.2. His yak was 6.1. Like this is a tight end who was stretching the field legitimately. He's going to Toledo, an offense that has traditionally gotten pretty good use out of tight end, and definitely did last year too in Torres.
Oh yeah.
They're losing some production from the receiver room. He's a player that I'm not sure I'm drafting, but like he's high on my watch list for sure. At any time a tight end has an ADOT over 13, over 10, really.
Oh yeah.
On 65 targets, like that's a player I think I need to be paying attention to. That's a really productive tight end. It just so we'll see kind of where that leads. But I like the opportunity he has at Toledo for sure. Like he's a guy that I think people need to know his name.
I agree. To me, all four of these guys are instant watch list guys, right? If we start getting reports out of camp about how they're dominating, or they're performing really well for their teams, then maybe they move into that draftable range, right? I don't think we can ever get to the point where any of these guys get too crazy with their ADPs, right? Yeah. With that, Mox, I think we've come to the end here. Again, a lot of brand new names for people to get excited about. I think that this is a show that I'm going to look forward to every single year moving forward. I don't think we've really done a show like this to really take some time to focus in on these FCS transfers. Obviously, through the tight ends in here today, but I think the FCS guys are more attractive in terms of their potential for CFF. Like I mentioned before, and as you kind of highlighted over and over again throughout the show when we were talking about this jump from the FCS to a lot of these G5 schools, the line between those conferences is a lot more blurred than really in previous years. And so I think that that's where a lot of the excitement comes. These are basically almost, we're treating them like true freshmen that are coming in and almost guaranteed to start, right? And so I think that's what makes it very exciting for a lot of these guys, and very good information, obviously, for supplemental draft season. Whenever you do that, whether you're sane and do it in May, June time, or if you're insane and you do it in late February, early March, which I know some of you C2C people do. So all that being said, Mox, we've had a long show here today, a lot of great information. What other stuff are you working on, man? What kind of stuff can be expected out of the Campus of Canton world? We obviously have our freshman and supplemental draft coming out not later this month, in about a month's time, of which I assume a lot of these some of these FCS players are going to find their way into the supplemental portion of that guide. But what else we got going on?
I mean, that's it. That's a huge undertaking for a lot of the team at Camp Scan. So I'm looking really forward to that. I've had the chance to look at quite a few profiles, and I think some of the data that we're adding this year is going to be some difference making stuff that we haven't really given out to the public before, that we've had, and we've kind of and put a lot of nuance on our own. So it'll be fun for sure.
All righty. Yeah, very much looking forward to that. That's always one of my favorite ones every single year. I basically treat it as a Bible in terms of where to start with my supplemental drafts for all my dynasty leagues and everything. But also, again, just finding some of those freshmen that are going to kind of fly under the radar, especially early on in drafts, right? That this guide is usually one of the first to kind of pick out some of these guys to say, like, hey, this depth chart is wide open for these guys, and they could potentially become early producers that not a lot of people have their pulse on. So absolutely worth it. $20.
Absolutely.
If you're part of our yearly membership, it comes for free. If you're in the scholarship and
NIL tier.
NIL
tier gets all 3 guides as part of their thing. I believe the second tier scholarship gets their choice of 1 guide.
Yes.
And if you aren't a member and you want to get the guide, it's 25% off right now. If you pre-order.
Yep. And if you want to take advantage of those yearly membership tiers in order to be able to get the guide for free along with your membership, make sure you plug in that promo code NATTY at NATTY for 10% off on that. So then that's just an even bigger deal. So with all that being said, Mox, it's been a long day. A lot of information here. Appreciate you coming on, man. It has been an absolute blast this past month having you on. A lot of great information. All being said, we come to the end of the show. All of you guys out there, thank you all for listening. If you have not already, make sure you leave a like, comment, subscribe. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you're on the podcast side of things, make sure you follow the show. Leave a 5-star review wherever you can. Make sure you check out the rest of the Campus to Canton podcast network for shows ranging on pretty much anything you can think of related to the college fantasy game. We'll be back here next Monday with the Way Too Early draft special, and then the week after that, we'll be releasing a full video breaking down every round of that draft. So be on the lookout for that over the next couple of weeks. Until then, appreciate all of you guys, and I hope you guys have a wonderful and blessed week. See y'all.